I'm Millie Weaver, and you're watching the Millennial Millie Show. Well, the House Republicans have now taken control, and they've already announced that they are going to open a probe into the Biden family for potential crimes of tax evasion, money laundering, and human trafficking. Well, there are other charges as well that they're looking into, but this is huge. This is the Republicans actually flipping it around on the Democrats now, saying, hey, you guys wanted to try to weaponize your positions, weaponize the House and the justice system to go against your political opponents. Well, we're not going to cover for you anymore. We're going to be looking into the Biden families for their illegal dealings with other nations. Hunter Biden, his laptop, all of it. So they announced they will be looking into the following violations: conspiracy or defrauding the United States, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, violations of the Foreign Agents Registration Act, violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, violations of the Victims of Human Trafficking and Violence Protection Act of 2000, tax evasion, money laundering, conspiracy to commit money laundering. So Republicans just announced this in a press conference. Here you go.
What we have uncovered. We are also sending letters to the Biden administration officials and Biden family associates renewing our request for voluntary production of documents relevant to this investigation. This is an investigation of Joe Biden, the President of the United States, and why he lied to the American people about his knowledge and participation in his family's international business schemes. National security interests require the committee conduct investigation, and we will pursue all avenues that have long been ignored. Committee Republicans have uncovered evidence of federal crimes committed by and to the benefit of members of the president's family. These include conspiracy or defrauding the United States, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, violation of the Foreign Agents Registration Act, violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, violations of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, tax evasion, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. The Biden family's business dealings implicate a wide range of criminality, from human trafficking to potential violations of the Constitution. In the 118th Congress, this committee will evaluate the status of Joe Biden's relationship with his family's foreign partners and whether he is a president who is compromised or swayed by foreign dollars and influence. I want to be clear. This is an investigation of Joe Biden, and that's where the committee will focus in this next Congress. I now turn.
Republicans could not have made a more powerful statement that says, it's our turn now, to the Democrats. Well, there's also good news. Nancy Pelosi also just announced that she's no longer going to be seeking a role as House Speaker in the future, even if the Democrats were to, say, win back the House during the next election cycle. Let's go ahead and hear it from her.
This awesome responsibility. Madam Speaker, standing here today, I'm endlessly grateful for all of life's blessings, for my Democratic colleagues whose courage and commitment with the support of your families have made many of these accomplishments possible. In fact, could not have been done without you.
So goodbye, Nancy Pelosi. The Democrat dinosaur, who has really been in power for way too long. I mean, she is like a giant Skeksis that just doesn't want to let go of that scepter, right? She's like, I'm still emperor. But now finally she's realizing, okay, I'm getting too old here. Her husband was recently attacked. So, I mean, I don't know, maybe that plays into it. Was it an attack, or we don't really know what happened with that. All we know is there was some kind of weird stuff going on between her husband and supposedly who this victim was, right? So it is interesting to see how she's kind of stepping down out of this leadership role, making way for the younger, more progressive Democrats, essentially, to take on those type of leadership roles. Well, interesting. I mean, who's to say whether or not there's something more to this story, but I think that this is definitely a victory for Republicans, and people are celebrating this all across Twitter right now as we speak. So between the Republicans just announcing that they're going to be doing this probe into the Biden family, which is definitely going to be looking at Hunter Biden's laptop. And also Nancy Pelosi announcing that she is now, resigning from any future leadership roles within the Democrat Party. I would say that today represents a shift. Essentially, the pendulum is now starting to swing in the opposite direction. And what other probes are we likely to see? Well, the Republicans are now talking about having House investigations into the January 6th Select Committee. I've heard a lot of talk about that. I've heard talk about Republicans looking into the illegal raids, the FBI raids on political figures. There's a lot of things that we need to see happen right now. But one of the things I think that's the most important that we really need to have a House committee for an investigation into is the election fraud. We need to have a thorough probe into these companies that own these electronic voting machines, and if they have any dealings with other entities that would make it a conflict of interest for them to be running our elections. We need to be looking into the code, right? And why we are violating the rights of Americans when you have the right to see and look at the vote as it's being cast. How can you look at the vote if it's all being done inside of an electronic voting machine and you're not actually able to look at and view the code? Why? Because these electronic voting machine companies say, well, our code is proprietary. You're not allowed to look at it. So how can one actually watch the counting of the votes? Because the counting of the votes is happening inside of a machine and you're not allowed to look at the code. You can't. So it's a violation of our rights as Americans. So they need to look into that, definitely. But then also the ballot harvesting and all the other things that's been going on. I mean, Arizona is wrought with issues right now. We just recently heard Kari Lake. She just came out and made a statement. Now, Kari Lake, essentially, they've announced that her opponent has won, Katie Hobbs. So are we going to see Kari Lake bow out, or are we going to see her challenge it? Well, she recently came out and made a statement. So let's hear what she has to say.
Arizona, Kari Lake here. I wanted to reach out to you to let you know that I am still in this fight with you. For 2 years, I've been sounding the alarm about our broken election system here in Arizona, and this past week has confirmed everything we've been saying. When we called for Katie Hobbs to recuse herself over a year ago, they ridiculed us. It turns out we were right. The fox was guarding the hen house, and because of that, voters have been disenfranchised. When we raised concerns, and I filed a lawsuit months ago to get rid of the electronic voting machines, they said we were crazy. Well, it turns out we were right. On Election Day, nearly half of all polling locations had problems with tabulating machines and printers. Malfunctioning tabulation machines forced voters to wait in line for hours to exercise their sacred right to vote. I talked to voters who waited in line for hours. One man told me he went to a location and there was a 3-hour line because the tabulators weren't working. He drove 15 miles to another location and the printers weren't working. He drove another.
I'm sorry, but how is that not election interference? Expecting voters to stand in line for 3 hours or more, that is definitely election interference because no one's going to have that time. People have jobs, they have lives they have to go participate in. They can't stand in line for hours on end. So that's exactly what they were doing, trying to wait these voters out. Many voters left because they didn't have that time to sit there and stand in line. 3 hours is excessive, and I would argue that it definitely seems like that's some kind of election interference. Why couldn't they have just resorted to, okay, the machine's down, paper ballots, go ahead and start filling it out, right? It doesn't seem like they gave that option. It seems like they just told people, sorry, you're just going to have to wait for hours on end for these electronic voting machines to be fixed, right? Definitely seems off, definitely.
Another 15 miles and was finally able to cast his vote, but he's not sure it counted. Our election officials failed us miserably. What happened to Arizonans on Election Day is unforgivable. Tens of thousands of Maricopa County voters were disenfranchised. Now, I am busy here collecting evidence and data. Rest assured, I have assembled the best and brightest legal team, and we are exploring every avenue to correct the many wrongs that have been done this past week. I'm doing everything in my power to right these wrongs. My resolve to fight for you is higher than ever. This movement started in Arizona, and it quickly expanded to all 50 states. It's a movement of mama bears and papa bears and students and Arizonans who love this country, who want secure borders, who want schools that prepare their children for the real opportunities that are out there. It's a movement of Arizonans who want safe streets once again and want the drug crisis to come to an end. It's a movement of Arizonans who want prosperity and the pursuit of happiness. That movement is stronger than it ever has been. And I can promise you one thing. This fight to save our republic has just begun. I love you, Arizona, and I love you, America. Hey, Arizona.
So this is also a movement of Americans that want to ensure their right to vote. You know, people are sending their sons and daughters off to go die in wars overseas to protect our rights and our freedoms, right? So to now think that our vote doesn't matter, our votes could be being stolen, that's a serious issue, okay? And we definitely need to all pressure our representatives now in the House, having control over the House, to do something about it and tell them, hey, if you don't do something, you're going to be hearing about it, because we're not going to stand for our votes being stolen. Without our votes, without having that say in our government, at that point, we're just peasants. We're just slaves. We're serfs. We'll just do what the big brother government tells us to do at that point, because we won't actually have a say in our own government. That's not how the United States of America was founded. It's founded upon the principles of the people self-governing. Can't self-govern if you don't have the right to vote, if you don't have a free and fair election process. That is why we absolutely need to have hearings in the House and oversight committees looking into these electronic voting machines and looking into our election process as it stands. We know that because of COVID-19, they use that to justify this mail-in ballot racket that they've been running, where they essentially have all these mail-in drop box locations. People are just, there's video coming out where people are just shoving in gripfuls, handfuls of ballots into these ballot drop boxes. And where's there any type of thing that's checking these people to see their IDs, to see if it's their vote, or where they're even getting these ballots for? We've heard of ballot harvesting operations where people essentially are paying people for ballots, or just filling out ballots and stuffing them in. And this is a problem. We can't have this type of stuff going on. It's a laughing stock, because elections can easily happen in one night, and now we're seeing election week. It's no longer election night. We're dealing with election week, and that's just not right. Okay? It's not right. We have enough problems to deal with as American citizens, right? We don't have the time to sit around and wait for an election result for an entire week. People don't have the time to sit in line at a polling location or voting location for 3 hours just to cast their vote. People are too busy having jobs and working so they can pay for these outrageous prices brought to you by the Democrat Party. Prices which are now breaking records. For this Thanksgiving week or weekend, we're going to be seeing outrageously high gas prices. They're projecting that they'll average $3.69 across the nation. That means that in some states it's going to be higher than that. Okay? This is the highest seasonal level ever for the weekend, according to the fuel savings platform. The national average is projected to stand at $3.68 on Thanksgiving, nearly 30 cents higher than last year, 20 cents higher than the previous year. So these are high gas prices. And what is that going to do? That's going to trickle down. It's going to have an effect on the price of goods and everything else. Okay? That means Christmas is going to get a little bit more expensive this year. That means little Timmy's not going to get the presents that he could have otherwise gotten underneath his Christmas tree this holiday season, because his parents are going to be shelling it out to the gas companies. They're going to be paying for that inflation, because now, to ship food in, it costs more money. Families are struggling to be able to even buy groceries. So, people are obviously not happy. We know that. The polls have shown that the people in America are not happy. So why did we see the election go the way it did? Well, this is exactly why we need to have that congressional oversight committee, that congressional probe into investigating what's going on with these electronic voting machines, what's going on with our elections. Okay, I think we can do better, right? I think as a nation, we can do better than what has been happening right now. It's weaponized incompetence. They're like, oh, it's just broken. Sorry, I mean, no. We're not going to stand for that. Well, never fear, guys. President Trump just recently announced that he is, in fact, running for president of the United States in 2024. So we can all applaud that now. And I think that by having the House, at least the Republicans will be able to secure that the Democrats won't be able to continue their probes into President Trump and essentially their witch hunt, their clown show, J6 committee hearings, to try to stopple him from being able to run in 2024, which we know that a lot of this is political, okay? So they don't want him to be able to run. So what are they doing? They are trying to investigate him for any little thing, right? Any little thing they want to investigate this man for. They want to tie him to rioters that stormed the Capitol, right? When his speech wasn't even over yet, when some of these people busted through the barricades, which, believe me, these were those tiny little cattle gates. They were not actual fencing that they put up for riots or for actual protests. They were just tiny little corrals. So when those first people broke through those gates there, Trump was still giving his speech. They weren't there for his speaking event. They weren't there for him. They were there for ulterior motives. Okay? And who benefited? Who benefited ultimately from that happening? The GOP and the Democrat Party. The establishment. Yes, that's right. The GOP and the Democrats work together as establishment to try to take out grassroots movements in America. Why? Because the deep state doesn't want anyone that's not under their control to be able to actually get into these positions and actually do something about these problems and do something about the way the system is set up right now. So what's the best way to take out Trump? Well, frame him up for something and then try to go after him and all his supporters after they've stolen his presidency. And, that's how they did it. That's what they were doing. Trump did not benefit from that. Why? Because they were about to break off into joint sessions in both the House and the Senate. And what were they going to hear? That's right. They were going to hear the evidence and the witnesses pertaining to all the claims of election fraud and election tampering. That's what Rudy Giuliani had announced on the stage, right? Right before President Trump gave his speech. They were already storming through the gates when Trump was up on stage giving his speech. This was absolutely an operation to shut down that. Why? They didn't want that to happen. They didn't want that to come out. Now, here's the problem here. I'm a little doubtful that this House, even though it is now held in the majority with Republicans, that it's actually going to look into and do the needed but dirty work of actually getting into what's going on in the elections. Why? Because some of these GOP members that are establishment are benefiting from it. So it's going to be a little bit harder, right? I think that the probe into Hunter Biden, the probe into the Biden family is a little bit safer for the establishment than the election issue. So we'll see if that actually happens. All right. Now, President Trump, I have supported him throughout the years, and I will continue to support him. And I think it's fair that with someone like President Trump, who represents the people, the grassroots, right? He belongs to the people. He belongs to us, right? But every once in a while, sometimes our representatives that represent us, they kind of go off the guardrails, right? Or they'll say things that it's like, okay, you kind of need to be checked on this one. And so when President Trump gave his speech where he announced his 2024 presidential bid, he came out and announced some of the policies he was running on. Now, there's one policy in particular that has caused a little bit of division amongst the conservatives. And I could see why, because it is, in my opinion, it's a bit of a drastic policy. And it pertains to the drug problem in America right now, right? Where we have fentanyl, opioids pouring into the United States very much through our southern border, which the Democrats have allowed to be wide open. And you have massive amounts of Americans being killed from overdosing. And oftentimes it's not that the drug users are seeking to use fentanyl. It's now that fentanyl is being cut into many street drugs, cocaine, methamphetamines, heroin, other, pills of sorts. So people will take these other street drugs thinking they're just going to take that drug and knowing their limit, only to then have to find out the hard way later that it actually had fentanyl and these people overdose and they die. Okay? So this is a problem. And, Trump has pretty much painted that he believes that this is an attack from a foreign force, essentially. So he's wanting to take drastic means to stop these drug dealers. Now, here's the issue with that. Oftentimes we give these powers and these controls to the government, and we do it when there's a president we like or we trust, but then later on that president's gone, that person's gone, and we're still left with that law. And maybe we might have a person in power who will abuse that, right? And we have to think about, how is the government likely to abuse a certain power that we give them? So take a listen to this clip of this policy that Trump announced right here. And then, why don't you guys comment below your thoughts?
We will wage war upon the cartels and stop the fentanyl and deadly drugs from killing 200,000 Americans per year. And I will ask Congress for legislation ensuring that drug dealers and human traffickers, these are terrible, terrible, horrible people who are responsible for death, carnage, and crime all over our country. Every drug dealer during his or her life on average will kill 500 people with the drugs they sell, not to mention the destruction of families. But we're going to be asking everyone who sells drugs, gets caught selling drugs, to receive the death penalty for their heinous acts, because it's the only way. We don't need any more blue ribbon committees. We don't need, I don't like to say this, and I don't even know if the American public is ready for it. And a lot of my people say, please don't say that, sir. That's not nice. They kill 500 people each on average. And if you don't do this, in China, when I was with President Xi, I said, President, do you have a drug problem? No, 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 we don't. He looked at me like I didn't know what I was doing. He said, no, we don't have a drug. How come you don't have a drug problem? He said, quick trial. What is a quick trial? I sort of knew. What is a quick trial? That's where, if you get caught dealing drugs, you have an immediate and quick trial, and by the end of the day, you're executed. That's a terrible thing. But they have no drug problem. The only drug problem they have is they make the fentanyl that comes into our country, and I had him stopping it. And then when I was gone, nobody ever mentioned it to him again. We were stopping it. That was way down, that number, but they sent it in. But they don't have a drug problem. Other countries, like Singapore, has no drug problem. No drug. You ask them, they don't even know what you're talking about when they say drug problem. They don't even know what you're talking about. They have no drug problem. And why should they sell there and risk their lives every time they sell when they can come to the United States and nobody even cares? They can do whatever they want to do and become rich. It's a disgrace. So if you want to get rid of that and also bring down your level of crime, probably 75 or 80%, that's the only answer. No more blue ribbon. I refuse to create them anymore. They were just a joke. It was New York people wanting to be on a committee for publicity reasons. No. No more blue ribbon committees. That's the only way you're going to solve the problem. And I hope politicians are listening, because they should do it quickly. Joe Biden.
So I agree with him on the statement that the blue ribbon communities don't do anything. Okay, they're a joke. But I don't think that this is a good policy. And look, I support Trump on a lot of issues, and I've supported him throughout his entire run, like before he, basically early 2016, all throughout his presidency. I'll continue to support him, and he's probably the one, most likely, honestly, who I'm going to vote for in 2024, right? That is if they don't try to take him out or something first. But even then, maybe I'll just write his name in. I don't know. But the thing is this, is, you know, that doesn't mean I agree with him on every single policy. And this is one of those policies I don't agree with him on. I think it's weird that this is kind of one of the policies that he wanted to talk about. And I feel like it almost foreshadows, is this what he's going to run on in 2024? Because this seems more of like a very staunch conservative GOP kind of policy to be pushing, like the whole war on drugs kind of idea. Whereas it's like, look, we all want to stop the problem with drugs. Let's focus on that border. Let's seal up that southern border so that we're not having people coming into and bringing the drugs in. Focus on that, like protecting our country's entry points, essentially. But the idea of drug dealers, how is that going to trickle down? Are we talking about like large traffickers of drugs and specifically fentanyl, or are we talking about just any drug dealers, even low-level drug dealers? How is that going to affect the black communities, essentially? Because we know that blacks actually comprise 62% of drug offenders admitted to state prison. In 7 states, blacks constitute between 80 and 90% of all people sent to prison based on drugs. So are we going to be seeing this, this war on drugs, essentially? Is this going to be impacting the black community in a negative way? And if so, we're thinking about elections and strategies, essentially. Is this going to scare off the moderate voters? Is it going to scare off the independent voters or the former Obama voters that voted for Trump overwhelmingly in 2016? So as far as like a policy, I don't think this is it, but hey, that's just my take on it. That's my perspective. I think there's more than one way to try to cut down on the drug problem. But the other consideration is how could this be used to go after political dissidents? I mean, we've heard of law enforcement agencies planting drugs on people, right? So with the FBI and the current rate they're going, and with these illegal raids, I wouldn't put it past them to try to plant drugs on political dissidents or people they want to take out. And then, talking about President Xi and what he's doing with these 24-hour executions, like these quick trials where they have a rapid trial and then they just execute someone, that's very dangerous, and it could be highly abused in the wrong hands. So although I do believe that Trump's intentions are good, I think he's thinking this is the only way we're going to stop the drug problem. As far as a policy goes, I don't think it's the best approach. Let's just say that. But overall, despite some of the infighting going on amongst conservatives right now on who's the best candidate for 2024, Trump is still polling at the highest out of all of the candidates. I know we've heard a lot of talk about Ron DeSantis running, but it just seems like Ron DeSantis doesn't have it. He doesn't have what Trump has. He doesn't have what it takes. Trump is going to be that one. DeSantis is great. He's great for Florida, guys. But do you think he's actually going to be filling up massive stadiums full of people? That is the real question. I don't think so, okay? I think that, Trump represents a giant middle finger to the establishment and to the system. And I think that's why the people have been supporting him. And the reason why they have his back is because, he goes in there and says, I'm for the working person. I'm for the working class. I'm for the middle class. I'm going to disrupt the establishment and I'm going to shake things up. And so we know that if Trump is, if he actually wins in 2024, that will be the biggest signal or sign that the people could send to the establishment that we're not going to take it anymore. We're fed up with you. And we want a president that actually represents the people. All right, guys. Well, I want to hear your comments below in the chat to see what your thoughts are on these subjects, because I think it's healthy for people in the various political parties, conservative party, for example, to engage in constructive but respectful dialogue. All right, guys. I hope you enjoyed the show. I'm Millie Weaver. signing off.